Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Wake Up.
It's time to wake up with Sonia Poulton.
It certainly is. And happy new year to you all out there. Today, of course, is the spring equinox in the Northern Hemisphere. And boy, have we needed this. I see you in the comments, and it is lovely here. It's lovely and it's sunny and it's gorgeous and I'm loving it. How are you? I'm here. Is there a problem? Can you not see me? Oh, yes, apparently you can. Wild Aussie woman can see me. Good morning, all. Nikki, can you see me? Is there a problem? London lady, is there a problem? Can you not see me? Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, gang, says Marco. I hope you are. I'm going to proceed on the basis that you can see me, hopefully. Yes, you can. Wonderful. As I say, Happy New Year. Welcome to the show that doesn't care how rich you are, how well connected you are, how famous you are, how influential in media you are. If you're a wrong un, I'm calling you out. So to coincide with the BBC's Charity Fest Comic Relief today, I'm going to deep dive into two comedy characters who owe much of their success to the BBC and have contributed in the past to comic relief. Here they are. David Walliams and Matt Lucas. And I've received multiple requests, particularly for Walliams. So I thought I would take a look at both of them, and I did. And there have been times this week when the red flags have gone into overdrive, frankly. This pair have been problematic with a capital P for a very long time. We've yet to know the half of it, of course, but I will attempt to fill in at least some of that other half. David Walliams has been significantly more involved with comic relief and its associated charity Sport Relief than Matt Lucas. Walliams even presented the whole event from 2013 to 2015. Such was his popularity at the time, until whispers started to be heard about him. It is no exaggeration to say that people have been talking about the problematic David Walliams for rather a long time, and his influence and popularity has given him the type of power that makes people not want to speak out. But that influence has waned. Now, the people who formerly stood by him have distanced themselves for fear of even worse coming out than we already know about him. In short, David Walliams became a liability. But what of his partner, Matt Lucas, a man who always seems to fly under the radar despite being a household name? But briefly, to Comic Relief. Comic Relief is one of two major fundraisers the BBC throws twice a year. So there is Comic Relief tonight, that's in March, and Children in Need is in November. Both of those charities are deeply problematic. Deeply problematic. Amazon have partnered with Comic Relief to sell their red noses. Very famous for, it's also known as Red Nose Day, wearing red noses. And last year, Comic Relief raised something around £34 million. So interesting, isn't it, that they team up with the biggest globalist of globalist distributors. And Comic Relief, for those who don't know, was founded in 1985 by screenwriter Richard Curtis and comedian Lenny Henry. Their mission, so they told us, was to use comedy and laughter to raise money for people in need. They were particularly interested when they launched in the famines in Ethiopia and Sudan. And they were, I'm sure you're not surprised to hear, inspired by what Bob Geldof and others had done with Band-Aid Live Aid. And again, more people who decided that Africa was the way to go. And the idea, of course, with Comic Relief was to raise money for vulnerable people. That's what we're always told. And initially, it was focused on disadvantaged people in Africa, later expanded to include projects in the UK. And a core idea from the start was to ensure that every pound donated by the public went directly to charitable projects, with operating costs covered by sponsors. And the initiative was officially launched on Christmas Day 1985 from a refugee camp in Sudan, and the first Red Nose Day followed in 1988. And essentially what we are doing with these two massive charities is we, the beleaguered public, are paying out twice. Rich, famous people are asking us to dig ever deeper in our pockets. Why aren't they appealing directly to their also rich and famous friends, such as, for example, Jeff Bezos? What about him? Why isn't he? I mean, he makes so much money, he could cover everything, if they were so inclined. But that's not what it's about, really. It is often about just kind of squeezing the public from every angle humanly possible. And I noted that journalist Charlotte Gill, who has been on Wake Up with me before, is currently doing a stunning job revealing where your comic relief funds go to. And a brief overview is very much now, they are very much engaged with the whole issue of kind of hate crime, and which is very problematic, because one of the recipients of comic relief money was Race Council in Wales, a global majority fund, it's known as. They received £318,000. And what they're looking for is increasing the punishment for committed hate crimes, anything to do with, well, race hate crimes, they say. But we already cover all that in law. Why do we need to be giving £318,000 for such a thing, and for them to want to punish us with ever more and ever increased totalitarian rules and laws? And there's a number of things, there are a number of initiatives that honestly just should be covered. It's already covered. I'm not quite entirely sure why they're continuing to cover it. And one of them is about sort of going into schools, making a more inclusive curriculum in schools, more inclusive to do with immigrants and migration and what they call the BAME community, although I don't know anybody who's Black or Asian who likes to be referred to as the BAME community. That sounds very much like a globalist word to me, or a globalist description. And I absolutely agree that the curriculum should reflect a diverse society. But that already happens. I mean, when my daughter was at school, I actually ran a multicultural week at my daughter's school. But this should be a natural part of the school curriculum. The public should not have to fund it separately through comedy fundraisers. So that's, again, very ridiculous. There's huge amounts that is being paid to the very controversial asylum system, including £1,500,000 to Justice Together, £670,000 to Metro charity LGBTQ. And again, that's all about the kind of intersectionality. And again, the lesbian and gay lobby is extremely well funded, certainly doesn't need any further money. Then £400,000 to British First, a highly controversial charity which assists immigration and refugees. And again, really problematic. And there's just loads of them. And in fact, what it actually seems now is Comic Relief is very much engaged in funding initiatives to do with LGBTQ plus and asylum. So I'm not sure that that has anything at all to do with the original intention. Not at all. So that's enough on Comic Relief. Let me turn my attention to two of the BBC's former comedians, Walliams and Lucas. And again, going back to what I said at the start, while compiling this, I felt waves of, well, frankly, deep revulsion, a truly sick feeling to the pit of my stomach. I am in no doubt that we are dealing with two absolutely repugnant individuals. And again, as I've said before, I am not alleging criminality, although to a certain degree, actually, I am today. But it's not anything that the public are not already aware of. And this is to do with very much my opinion on how I see things. And, you know, the thing is that it's already taken this long for it to leak out about David Walliams, and it could take yet more time for anything else that may emerge about him or Lucas. And again, I trust my instincts. If I feel naturally repelled by someone, then that's a clue. And then if I feel naturally repelled by two people who've come together, then that's a huge, massive red flag for me. And I feel that with David Walliams and Matt Lucas. Absolute revulsion towards the pair of them. Absolute revulsion. And as this next hour or so unfolds, you'll begin to understand why. So who are they? Well, Matt Lucas grew up in Middlesex, to the west of London. He was said to have been knocked down by a car as a toddler and lost his hair at the age of 6 as some sort of delayed reaction. That's what we are told regarding the fact that he has famously always been bold. He had a private education. At 11, he became a day boy at Haberdasher's School. It's now known as Haberdasher's Ask, where his contemporaries included Sacha Baron Cohen, probably more famous for doing the kind of Ali G character, and David Baddiel. It was, some people claim, a haven of Zionism, but I don't know if that's entirely accurate because there were people from all denominations there. Haberdasher's Boys' School became Haberdasher's Asks Boys' School, and it's a public school in Elstree, Hertfordshire, for boys aged 14 to 18. There is also a separate girls' school. David Walliams grew up in Banstead in Surrey. He was educated at Reigate Grammar School. Walliams and Matt Lucas first met at the National Youth Theatre in 1990. Walliams did an impersonation of Frankie Howard, British comedian from like the 70s. And Walliams is very much in that kind of mode, very camp. And Matt Lucas did an impersonation of, drum roll, Jimmy Savile. I'm not suggesting that Matt Lucas knew who Jimmy Savile was at that moment in time. I just find it interesting that he chose to do Jimmy Savile, a man who had nationally repulsed people for a very long time, well before 1990. Both ended up studying drama at Bristol University. They did not work together until 1995. That year, they appeared together at the Edinburgh Festival, became jobbing live comics. Their early double act was described as very hostile, fierce, and abrasive, and they honed their caricatures on the club scene in the 1990s. And the one thing that these two have become very, very famous for is playing grotesque caricatures of people and various stereotypes. And one of their earliest series was about various rock musicians, and they did the series called Rock Profile, in which they created these really grotesque characters. And I would argue that they are able to create such grotesque characters, and you will see more of what I mean as we go along, because they are grotesque, because it's there, or operating underneath the surface. And before their big break, they were also stars of the Paramount Comedy Channel in a show called Mash and Peas, and they appeared together in a music video for the Pet Shop Boys. But as I've said, they are best known for their long-running BBC comedy, Little Britain, which we will come to shortly. But first, a comment about their individual sexualities, because actually I think it's important. Matt Lucas is gay. David Walliams is, well, frankly, all kinds of everything. But the one thing he definitely is and is known for is his exceedingly camp persona. Very old school UK comedy, as I say, in the same lane as kind of Frankie Howard, that sort of thing. In terms of his sexuality, he is clearly someone is, how should we put it, fluid. In an interview, Walliams once claimed to be 70% heterosexual. And he's also hinted at being pansexual in the 2007 book Inside Little Britain, but said he did not like to be labelled with that word. Thank you for your super chat, Jacqueline. You are a star. And Walliams has referred to himself as being Britain's most famous bi-curious comedian, said he experimented with men in his youth. He has affirmed his love for gay culture. He said that if he was 19 again, he'd probably describe himself as non-binary. Yeah, people who have very little else of interest often do that, David Walliams. And he's talked about being that age and going to clubs wearing skirts. Well, what's changed? He still loves dressing up in women's clothes and has done so extensively in his stage shows. Perhaps that's the only way he feels he can do it. And for the longest time, David Walliams was portrayed by his mates in the media as some sort of dashing lover man. But his actions clearly show that this is a man who likes dressing up in women's clothes, a cross-dresser. And this is also a man who likes other men as well. None of these things I have a problem with, but I think it's important to note because of the characters they have created for Little Britain. They're close, we're told. Well, they were exceedingly close originally. Then they didn't speak for years, but originally they were very, very, very close. And there are at least 2 reports of sexual behaviour involving them on stage, sexual behaviour between them on stage. One is from an independent article. It's still online. It's from around, I think, 2004. And because it's a mainstream media article, if it was inaccurate, it would have been removed by now. And actually, it's an interview with Walliams and Lucas. And in it, the interviewer describes the time that they were working together on stage, and in circumstances, I'm quoting directly from the article, and in circumstances hard to grasp, Lucas's ness, his thing, I don't even think I can say that on YouTube, that's how mad we are, accidentally fell into Walliams' mouth. How does that happen? How does a man's appendage accidentally fall into another man's mouth on stage? Can somebody explain that to me? And this Independent article was so sycophantic. It was really about kind of downplaying how grotesque they are. And the way that is worded is extraordinary. To me, what they were doing, it appears obvious, is that they were carrying out a sex act on stage. That's what it appears to be. But the Independent have turned it into, how did that, that apparently accidentally fell into Walliams' mouth. That doesn't happen. That literally does not happen. And there was also a TikTok video which was kind of claiming a similar thing as well. So that kind of gives you a little bit of background of what they've been prepared to do in the public arena. But you haven't heard the half yet. Oh, we haven't even got to Britain's Got Talent yet, peeps. So Little Britain, it ran from 2003 to 2009 on the BBC in the UK, and from 2008 onwards on HBO in the US. The show came about when trainee BBC radio producer Ashley Blaker was given the job of coming up with ideas for TV and radio series, and he bumped into Lucas in London, and both of them had been together at Haberdasher Ask. And again, similar kind of background to a lot of the comedians who were coming through in the 90s and came through Oxbridge. Well, these guys were all kind of part of this public school, and there's been loads of them. They just kind of flooded British comedy, and actually none of them are particularly funny. And Blaker and Matt Lucas, as I say, were old friends from school, and Lucas took Blaker to the Groucho Club. Groucho Club, for those who are not familiar, is very much an in-club for media and the entertainment business. There's been a lot of rumours about what's taken place at the Groucho Club over the years, including allegations of child abuse, which have never been proven. Little Britain was launched as a radio show on BBC Radio 4. It later became a TV series on BBC Radio 3, and the show moved on to the very mainstream BBC One channel in November 2005. And I made a little collage of them. I don't know how much of that you can see, but it kind of gives you an idea of some of their characters. I'm going to work through them, and I have got some of their characters as separate images as well. And the characters they created were a problem, but with a 20-year distance, they are absolutely horrendous. To reflect back on them, it tells us so much about the warped creators, Lucas and Walliams. And the thing is, 20 years is not that long ago. So this idea that their defenders like to say, well, 20 years we were in a completely different era. We were not in a completely different era. 20 years ago, it was not acceptable to do blackface, right? That was not acceptable. It was not acceptable for Walliams to portray an upper class young man being breastfed by his mother. And I'm sure you remember this, the Bitty scene, that was really quite repugnant. That was Geraldine James, the actress, and David Walliams played this character, as I say, an upper middle class grown man, and he wanted Bitty, and Bitty was for him to be breastfed by his mother, which happened often in front of his girlfriends. Bitty was pure weird, says Vendetta. It was absolutely disgusting. It's gross, absolutely gross, but it gives you an insight into these people. Yes, synchronized soul, literally incest. It gives you an insight into these people, but there were more. He also had, do you remember the granny character? And that was where he, as a young lad, saw his mate's granny in a very sexualized way, and when he said hello to her, he'd snog her and all that kind of stuff. Really quite grotesque behavior, very, very creepy indeed. And clearly David Walliams had a bit of a thing for older women. In fact, he used to make this joke where he would imagine himself with Matt Lucas's mum. Well, I don't know about you, and my mum's not around anymore, but that's the kind of joke that would get somebody knocked out from where I come from if a grown man was imagining himself with somebody's mum. He really is, Folder, absolutely disgusting. These are sick people. And it's going to get sicker. So batten the hatches, people. But the characters were truly grotesque. Let's just bring this back onto the screen. So 20 years ago, they were not acceptable. Absolutely, they were not. But the difference is 20 years ago, this pair, Walliams and Lucas, were making a ton of money for the BBC. So it was allowed. So some of their characters, for example, Walliams portrayed a transvestite called Emily Howard, and Emily Howard's big thing was, I'm a lady, even though patently a man. Then there was Sebastian Love, very creepy gay guy who was in love with his prime minister boss. And there was Desiree, and a beast black woman played by David Walliams, again in blackface. Believe me, 20 years ago in the UK, it was not acceptable to do that. Right. They got away with it because they were influential and making a ton of money for the BBC. And Lucas played some also equally horrible characters, including Vicky Pollard. Vicky Pollard was based on this whole idea of her, well, it was working class, actually, what people like Walliams and Lucas used to call chavs. And so Vicky Pollard was like all done up in pink tracksuit, pineapple hairstyle, all that kind of stuff, and had very kind of convoluted utterances, yes, but no, but. And it was, again, a lot of their stuff is about punching down on vulnerable people or on people who have had more difficult starts in life than the pair of these had. Matt Lucas also played Marjorie Dawes, who ran this thing called the Fat Fighters Club. Again, a very abusive thing, attacking people within the Fat Fighters. Lucas also played David Jones, the only gay in the village in Wales, and some of the outfits that David Jones wore were frankly obscene. Tight leather. You can actually see a David Jones in the top corner here. Gina, I'm going to refer to your comment because it's actually spot on, and that is shaping society and shaping minds. MK Ultra through media, spot on. It is the normalization of a dysfunctional society, says just Andy, and it was all this kind of stuff that was going on. And then there was also, it was again punching down. They had this character called Andy Pipkin, who was pretending to be gay, and what was really bad was you know, at the start of the 2000s and on through that first decade, the government started to really turn its ire on sick and disabled people, and this whole idea that they were spongers and scroungers. So for them to have a character who pretended to be disabled, Andy Pipkin, and whenever the carer turned his back, Andy Pipkin got out and did exercises and ran around and everything like that, it really played into the whole idea that sick and disabled people were swinging the lead. And then they had Ting Tong, the mail order bride from Thailand. I should say that they have since expressed regret for some of these characters, but they've expressed regret because of the backlash that happened, and their stuff was being removed from like Netflix and BBC iPlayer. But the reality is, Little Britain was deeply distasteful and just kind of degenerate. And then they had this kind of air of respectability because they had the narrative, the commentary of what was going on in Little Britain delivered by actor Tom Baker. Well, Tom Baker is somebody who used to play Doctor Who, somebody who was kind of considered very well by a lot of British people. And so it gave it an air of respectability, which is frankly a bit problematic. But these two were and remain, I should imagine, exhibitionists, without a shadow of a doubt. And just referring back to the Independent piece that I talked about, which was written by Andrew Barrow, and it's beyond sycophantic, and it was in 2004. And in it, he talks to them about how kind of frequently they like to take off their clothes. And Matt Lucas, you know, obviously the only gay in the village. David Walliams almost constantly doing anything he could, whether it was being completely inappropriate with the prime minister or somebody's grandmother. It was constant sex, constantly. And so when they were talking about this exhibitionism, and Matt Lucas had said, personally, I don't think we're that exhibitionist as people, are we? And David Walliams said, I am. Yes, we know. And that has since been shown. And Lucas said, I like doing it in character. It's very liberating. And so that's what they've done. They have essentially socially, to a degree, engineered our society since the beginning of the 2000s. Television. Yes, that's it. Humour for the bassist. Absolutely. They also had a very successful live stage show of the series, Little Britain Live, which was produced in 2006. The live stage version, which I will get onto lately, is even more sane and featured. Remember, I said at the beginning, I'm not alleging criminality. Well, actually, for their live stage show, I believe that what we witnessed were actual live sexual assaults carried out by David Walliams. And I am going to play you a video later. And so, yes, to a degree, I am alleging criminality. And I believe that they've been allowed to get away with it. Because at one stage, this pair were treated like gods. They really were. They made a heap of money for themselves and for the BBC, from books to merchandising to rights to stage shows. They were, you know, they had increasing applause and rewards. And in January 2005, they were named the most powerful people in TV comedy. It was by the Radio Times, which is essentially the BBC's listings magazine. But nonetheless, to be named the most powerful people in TV comedy is quite something. And that explains why they've been allowed to get away with so much really problematic behavior for a very long time. And Mr. Law Williams is just reminding me of Sacha Baron Cohen's Borat in his Mankini. And again, interesting, isn't it? The debasing and the degradation of TV, frankly, at the hands of some people who, in my opinion, are degenerates. So the characters from Little Britain appeared in a 2010 UK television advertising campaign for the Nationwide Building Society. So they were hugely mainstream. Absolutely, they were. The Guardian newspaper at the time called Lucas and Walliams national treasures. There's that description again. And you know, when people are described as national treasures, I usually have a problem with it, and for a good reason. Then GQ, Gentleman's Quarterly magazine, glossy magazine, pronounced Little Britain by far the funniest show of 2004. So they were very much loved. And royal fans were said to include Prince William and Prince Harry. Their later series, Come Fly With Me, a 6-part series which aired on BBC One, didn't have the same huge appeal. And by this point, people were really sick of them, actually sick of them. And as expected, of course, with the types that I cover in this series, both have been given establishment honours. David Walliams was appointed an Officer of the Order of the British Empire in the 2017 birthday honours for services to charity and the arts. He formally received the award from Princess Anne at Buckingham Palace, and this was to recognise his work with Sport Relief, the Comic Relief Associated charity, including Swimming the Channel and the Thames, as well as his career in the arts. Matt Lucas was given his OBE much later. He was appointed an OBE in the 2026 New Year's Honours for services to drama, and that was announced last December. So I want to just kind of muse a little bit about what impact Little Britain actually did have, because our commenters, quite accurate, shaping society, and the messages that they were spreading were absolutely repugnant stereotypes. They were classist. They were absolutely anti-working class. They were disableists. They were anti-disabled people because they had this character who was pretending to be disabled, was swinging the lead. They were unquestionably perverse. They were racist. They were sexist. They were paedophilic in Little Britain and got away with it. They were homophobic. They reduced groups of people to grotesque caricatures, very, very public schoolboy stuff that has been allowed to run rampant on British TV since the 90s. And Walliams and Lucas have both been allowed to breathe a great deal of toxic, outdated, problematic, and even dangerous stereotypes into the public domain and on the public purse, thanks to the BBC. Their comedy, without a shadow of a doubt, has often relied on them humiliating vulnerable or disadvantaged groups. And perverse, paedophilic, they had this segment, which I will talk about later, called Hide the Sausage, which they did on their live show as well. It's a sketch in Little Britain. It was criticised for portraying a predatory, paedophilic character. Absolutely sickening stuff. And what does it say about the viewing public back then, when at its peak, Little Britain was regularly being watched by about 10 million people? Well, I don't know if I have the answer to that, and I don't know if I want to know the answer to that. And I think sometimes when we are force-fed something, especially on a major channel like BBC, that immediately makes people feel like they have to watch it. It's a strange thing. It really is. Anyway, as I say, they made an absolute fortune along with sold out tours. They did a roaring trade in merchandise, in licensing, all different things. The defenders of Little Britain said, this is a form of social commentary. It casts a light on our country's small-minded Little England mentality. No, it didn't. It actually didn't. It wasn't a form of social commentary. That's an old excuse to get away with a whole lot of stuff. This was punching down in every sense of the word. And they said, you know, in more recent times, that they definitely do it different now because it's a different time. It wasn't that different, as I said, 20 years ago. It's just that they got away with it 20 years ago. But, you know, I think it's always very instructive to see what people like at the beginning of their career, because that's who they are until they get honed and refined. But the thing is, TV was not doing anything to refine these people. TV was allowing them to be grotesque and toxic because, as we know, there are wider agendas involved. Absolutely. And what happened in more recent times, as things became much more kind of PC, their shows were removed from BBC iPlayer, from Netflix and BritBox, due to all of the issues and more that I've already raised up. And honestly, as I say, I don't think that humor was part of its time. I don't. I think it was foisted upon us by the renowned and known perverse BBC. The clues were all there for what Walliams would later be accused of, but he was making so much money for the BBC, they didn't care what Lucas and Walliams were doing. And Lucas and Walliams, they fell out around 2011 to about 2018. Don't know why. Can't find records as to why they fell out, but they did. And but they were seen together for the first time in May 2018 at the funeral of their friend Dale Winton. Dale Winton, also a very camp TV presenter. And we've had that for a very long time. People think that that camp TV presentations dating back to the 60s and 70s is very much part of British humour, but I'm not convinced it is, actually. And certainly not when it's about punching down and humiliating people. But Dale Winton didn't do that. Dale Winton didn't do that. And so what happened then was that David and Matt reunited in a professional capacity in 2019, and they announced this huge TV comeback, and they started working together with a one-off Little Britain special called Little Brexit, and that followed the referendum. It was broadcast on Radio 4. They also came together during C19 for a big night in appearance, and they have done, frankly, some disgusting stunts for comic relief. Walliams has done comic relief on his own, as I say. He's been involved in presenting it. But they together have done some, this was 2022. And I don't know if you can see from that picture, but you can see Matt Lucas, like these people, they are absolute exhibitionists. And Matt Lucas uses his characters to reveal as much flesh as humanly possible. and to degrade our society. I think this stuff is degrading. Honestly, I actually do. And I think it does degrade our society. And I am far from a frump. Far from a frump. But that's what they did for Red Nose Day. And it was just really quite repugnant, frankly. And what they did was they did a return to their rock profiles for Red Nose Day in 2022. And the rock profiles had seen them over the years kind of play musicians such as Michael Jackson, such as Amy Winehouse, such as Gary Barlow. And then in February 2025, they came back together again to present a twice weekly podcast entitled Making a Scene. And they interview different personalities and they kind of discuss how their lives have been and who would portray them in biopics, and they bring on their mothers and they do all kind of stuff like that in their podcasts. But these days they are certainly less popular than they were, and that's because people know about them. So let's look at them individually. So here is Matt Lucas, and as many people have already commented in the comments, he's lost a ton of weight. He was significantly obese for a very long period of time. He's now looking very much like he has Ozempic face. Let me just Did you Awakening first saw Matt Lucas at Edinburgh Festival, then next on Shooting Stars with Vic and Bob? Absolutely, he did do that. So Matthew Richard Lucas was born in the Paddington area of central London on 5th of March 1974, son of Diana and chauffeuring business owner and convicted fraudster John Stanley Lucas. Lucas's family is Jewish. Some of his mother's family fled Nazi Germany just before the Second World War. He was raised in a Reform Jewish household, although his parents came from Orthodox Jewish families. And as said, obviously, he's an actor, he's a comedian, he's a writer, he's a television host, and more. And first came to prominence, as noted in the comments, on the comedy panel show Shooting Stars. That was kind of one of his major breaks as a solo artist. And from 2015 to 2017, he portrayed the role of Nardole in the BBC series Doctor Who. In 2005, he took his first role as in a television drama, a supportive role as a Venetian Duke in the BBC historical series Casanova. It was written by Russell T Davies. Well, Russell T Davies, the reason I mentioned Doctor Who and Matt Lucas's role in Doctor Who later, well, Russell T Davies has all but destroyed Doctor Who by making it go beyond woke. He's part of the UK kind of media gay mafia. I don't even know if I'm allowed to say that, but he is. That is the reality. They both are. And Graham Norton and a number of other people, and who have been frankly ruling TV media for a very, very long period of time. And, very, very problematic if you criticize any one of them. But I don't give a flying, as you jolly well know around here. He's appeared, by the way, in a number of films. Alice in Wonderland, Bridesmaids, in Paddington, in Wonka. He also presented the baking competition, the Great British Bake Off. And in 2017, Lucas released his autobiography titled Little Me, and quite revealing of his character, what he was about. Very distinct and different in many respects to David Walliams, but where they both come together is absolutely evident in what they've done on Little Britain. And that is both of them are kind of quite debased, quite degraded characters. And I'm sure they'd have a lot of problems with my descriptions, but I don't care. And what also alarms me about both of them is, despite the fact that they have created these highly sexualized, debased characters, both of them jumped on the children's book market. And I don't want people like Walliams and Lucas writing for children, but they have. And Walliams in particular has made a mint from it. I find that reprehensible because they're breathing their lewd ideas, albeit in a hidden way, into young children's minds. And in 2023, Lucas wrote a children's book titled The Boy Who Slept Through Christmas. Lucas has also ventured into stage musicals, including in 2002 when he took a role in Boy George's musical Taboo at the Venue in London. And he played the performance artist Lee Bowery, who from the 80s, I knew Lee when I was part of the London club scene. Lee Bowery was kind of like one of the four core front runners of a man who dressed up in kind of lots of makeup, very performative, didn't for a second believe himself to be a woman, by the way, which was always quite refreshing. Matt Lucas, it has to be said, has expressed regret regarding his portrayal of, let me see if I can bring up an imagery here, his portrayal of transvestites. So what they did, let me bring this in. So the Emily Howard character, but they both dressed up as women, well, transvestites actually. And Matt Lucas in particular has expressed deep regret, well, because he's very much now part of the LGBTQ plus into infinity agenda, and it doesn't do now to be aligned with the type of people that he is, and having done the type of stuff that he has done. So but what Lucas has said, that if he could go back and do Little Britain again, he would not make jokes about transvestites. So he would probably make jokes about, I don't know, people who come from council houses, the disabled, but not under any circumstances men who dress as women. And they have admitted, actually, that the comedy that they've created is a more cruel kind of comedy, and some. So at least they do have some awareness, but it didn't stop them, did it? And they say that they've become much more empathetic as they've gotten older. I don't agree. I don't believe that. What I think Lucas actually means is that people are, that there is no longer an audience that is prepared to put up with their shtick. I think that's the reality. He also came out attacking the LGB Alliance. Now, I went to the inaugural meeting of the LGB Alliance, and the LGB Alliance was formed as a direct result of Stonewall, the big LGB charity, turning its back on lesbian, gays and bisexual people for the trans pound. That was the reality. And Lucas has been highly critical of the LGB Alliance, calling it anti-trans, stating that it doesn't represent me or others. You know what? It's very easy for a wealthy gay media personality and actor to say that. He doesn't have big burly men trying to get into his woman's space. Okay. And I hate that kind of arrogance that these rich and famous people have of poo-pooing how women have felt about men forcing their way into our spaces, and he's no different. So I would say that even though he doesn't want to offend trans or transvestites, he don't care about women or anybody else, frankly. He has also shown a great deal of support for trans youth. He expressed concerns about new recommendations regarding the treatments of young trans and non-binary people in schools, suggesting they could cause damage. You know what? He's a problem. He is an absolute problem. He wants children to be subject to the trans agenda. And, you know, he's also part of that whole thing, aligning with that whole thing of children can be born in the wrong body. No, they cannot. You are a degenerate, Matt Lucas. Bottom line, absolute bottom line. And again, they continued to do apologies. Lucas, along with Walliams, in 2020, they apologized again for their portrayal of characters using racial caricatures, including an obese Caribbean woman called Desiree, who portrayed in blackface. They did a portly Thai bride, as I say, called Ting Tong. This was horrible racial stereotyping that was not acceptable at the beginning of the 2000s. No, it was not. They want us to believe that. And fair to say, Matt Lucas has also been accused by a number of people, and I'm quoting them directly, of being a genocidal maniac. In 2022, he was the subject of BBC's Who Do You Think You Are? And he learned that many of his grandmother's cousins had been murdered in the Holocaust. And he also learned that his grandmother's cousin had lived with the family of Anne Frank as a subtenant in Amsterdam in 1942. And that's all quite touching stuff, if true. And in 2021, 83 years after his grandmother left Berlin, Lucas obtained German citizenship. Quite bizarre. And but he has, as I say, he has been accused of being a genocidal maniac, although not by me, it has to be said, because I simply couldn't find that huge proof to back that up. Because one thing I know about Matt Lucas is he tries to keep everything very much under the radar. He's not as out about everything as David Walliams has been. But certainly his background is very much sort of Zionism. He was involved in the Zionist youth grooming group RSY Netzer. And on the 16th of February this year, he was followed on the London Underground by a pro-Palestinian supporter who repeatedly shouted "Free Palestine," called Lucas a Zionist. The incident was captured on video. It drew widespread media criticism. And the thing is that because Matt Lucas is still very much part of the media establishment, he was then invited onto various media platforms to talk about being a victim of this guy. And I watched it. And although I thought it wouldn't be very nice to have somebody doing that, I didn't think it necessitated him being, Matt Lucas being played the victim. I didn't. And he didn't want to discuss it. And what ended up happening was the guy, Thomas Bourne, actually lost his job. And that is really key and really important because many people will say you cannot criticize Zionism or Jews. And I don't conflate the two because that is anti-Semitic, but I'm saying both. Many people say in the UK that you cannot criticize either Zionism or Judaism because it will lead to you losing your job. And Thomas Bourne has kind of shown that to be the case. And but he was going up the escalator. He saw Matt Lucas going up on the other side, and he approached him and filmed him, and Matt Lucas was covering his face. And as I say, wasn't necessarily pleasant. And although having said that, he is a public figure, not Thomas Bourne, Matt Lucas. So this guy had every right to ask him about Palestine and about Zionism, particularly given that this guy was a long-term pro-Palestine supporter and had more in-depth understanding of where Matt Lucas was coming from in terms of Zionism than I actually do, in truth. Anyway, he lost his job, and that was frankly to be expected. And also, what a load of baloney, though, to do with Matt Lucas, because Lucas was awarded an honorary degree, a Doctor of Letters by the University of Bristol. And what's wrong about that is that Matt Lucas didn't even complete his university course. So what a terrible message the University of Bristol sent out to their students. And that is, you can start here, you can not complete your course, and we will still give you an honorary degree and make you a Doctor of Letters as long as you become famous for putting debased and degraded characters out there in the public arena. And I think that's a terrible message to send to students. And Lucas said he first suspected he was gay at the age of 7, and he married in a civil partnership in December 2006. His guests included Neil Tennant from the Pet Shop Boys, Elton John, and Courtney Love. Courtney Love, of course, many questions surround that woman. Lucas and his civil partner, Kevin McGee, separated and had their civil partnership dissolved through the High Court in 2008. From 2012 to 2015, Lucas lived with his Bridesmaids co-star Rebel Wilson in West Hollywood. Rebel Wilson is, in my opinion, a particularly deplorable character. Not only did she buy a baby and do the whole big, the whole big thing of, look, we've got a new baby and everything, because they buy these babies essentially. I don't believe in surrogacy. I'm absolutely opposed to surrogacy. And when you have two women together, I'm not quite sure why at least one of them can't be giving birth. And what seemed absolutely wrong to me is, again, it's because it's very much a trend in Hollywood, and they tell us all manner of things. Oh, they can't carry them. They say all that, right? But the truth is, in Hollywood, it's very, very fashionable to buy your babies. And that is how I consider surrogacy. But this week, it came out that Rebel Wilson's PR team had discussed plans to create anonymous websites that accused the producer of a show that Wilson was directing, that accused her of sex trafficking. Like fake smears. These are people working on behalf of Rebel Wilson who were concocting a lie that involved the movie producer Amanda Ghost. So Rebel Wilson had this movie, her directorial debut, The Deb, and the producer Amanda Ghost. There was clearly some problems between Wilson and Ghost. And so Wilson's PR team concocted these smears and lies about her being involved in sex trafficking. She does look similar to Lucas, Mel's. Absolutely, she does. But how reprehensible is that? And of course, they say, oh, no, Rebel Wilson didn't know anything about this. Yeah, but you have to take some responsibility to a degree because that's your team. And they're concocting heinous stuff. And believe me, teams don't come up with heinous ideas without some say-so from the boss. And very, very sick indeed, Buck Rogers. Very sick indeed. Horrible, disgusting stuff. So, and they lived together for a period of time. So maybe birds of a feather. But out of the two, on the surface, Matt Lucas appears to be the least problematic of the Walliams and Lucas duo. So let's get to David Walliams. David Walliams was born on the 20th of August, 1971, at St. Teresa's Maternity Hospital in Wimbledon, southwest London. Actually, he was born David Williams, but he changed his name to David Walliams when he joined College Equity, and there was already a member there named David Williams. And Walliams is I think it's a weird name to choose. I mean, I actually do, because it's quite difficult to pronounce, because people for the longest time often referred to him as Walliams, including myself, but it's Walliams. Yes, Sonia, surrogacy is a human rights violation, unquestionably. Sail Away said they villainized Benny Hill, yet idolized the likes of Walliams and Lucas. Sail Away, Benny Hill was, you may or not know, was actually loved by the women in his show, and he'd wanted to leave money to them, and then his relatives got involved. But just as an aside, yeah, Benny Hill was absolutely loved by the women in his show, who described him as decent, as kind, and all of these different things. I've never heard anybody describe David Walliams and Matt Lucas as decent and kind. Walliams, surrogacy. Yes. Anyway, when it comes to David Walliams, in addition to his work with Matt Lucas, he has served as a judge on Britain's Got Talent from 2012 to 2022. He's also an extremely successful children's author, which makes me sick to the pit of my stomach. His books have sold more than 50 million copies worldwide and have been translated into 53 languages. Several have been adapted for television, in which he has also appeared. And he's written and starred in various television projects, including the sitcom Big School and the drama Partners in Crime. He has received multiple national television awards for his work on Britain's Got Talent, although, as you will see, he was eventually forced to leave there due to his behaviour. More shortly. So what we've been told about David Walliams is he has publicly dealt with mental health struggles, including severe depression, suicidal thoughts, particularly linked to distress from professional issues. Now, whenever it comes out about these famous people, we suddenly hear that they have all manner of mental health issues and depression and blah, blah, blah. And we've been told about David Walliams that he has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And he described his 2006 swim of the English Channel as some sort of redemption. From what? One must wonder. When you take part in events, do you usually say, I did that as some sort of redemption? I doubt it. I think only a certain type of person feels the need to redeem themselves. So quite weird. He's, as I say, David Walliams has long been a problem, and he's been tolerated. One example, I mean, this has all been in the public domain, and I just don't understand how he's got away with it for so long. But the thing is, because they started to fall out of favor and started to make less and less money for their controllers and their handlers, then it was okay to kind of kick them under the bus. But one of the things that David Walliams did was when he was referring to Harry Styles. Now, Harry Styles was one of the young males who was put together by Simon Cowell to form One Direction. And in 2011, there was a rash of complaints that were made to Ofcom and Channel 4 because David Walliams had said excuse me, on a Channel 4 show, Chris Moyle's Quiz Night, in regard to Harry Styles. I'd like to suck his, I think you can fill in the blanks. It begins with C and ends with K. Harry Styles was only just 17 at the time. David Walliams was a big, hairy, grown-up man. It was disgusting. Disgusting. And there were people at the time saying, this is not okay. It's jokes like this set up a context of behavior. It normalizes behavior. It justifies it. And that is exactly what has been allowed to happen with this pair. Their grotesque behavior and sense of entitlement has been normalized and approved, particularly David Walliams. And the signs have been there for a very, very long time. He was involved in a very controversial event. He attended a President's Club charitable trust charity auction as a host in 2018, and he offered the opportunity to name a character in a future book as an auction prize. That was the third time he had been involved in that hosting, and that event was significantly subject to hardcore controversy, right? And undercover reporters stated that many of the hostesses were subject to groping and sexual harassment from the all-male attendees. Well, they're probably taking their lead from the auctioneer. And Walliams said, no, he attended the event in a strictly professional capacity as host and left immediately after his set ended, stating that he was absolutely appalled by the reports. But a lot of people weren't having it. And some bookshops removed his books from sale. One owner of Chicken and Frog, a bookshop, stated, even if he was unaware when the highly inappropriate suggested names were mentioned for his auction lot or the plastic surgery to add spice to your wife, he should have walked away. He did not. So they were offering sexual and abusive to women prizes. Right? Add spice to your wife. How dare you, for an all-male audience? He's disgusting. Yes, Buck, I've no doubt Harry Styles is probably someone who has been groomed by the music industry. So I'm in no doubt whatsoever that is a kid with problems. No doubt whatsoever. Anyway, so yeah, he should have. He should not have had anything to do with it. And I would suggest that they behaved that way because of the highly suggestive nature of the auction in the first place. So aside from Matt Lucas, Walliams' probably most famous and long-term media partner has to be Simon Cowell, I would imagine. So let me see if I can bring in a suitable. Here we go. This tells you everything. Here they are on a chat show together. And look, David Walliams is practically on top of Simon Cowell. You wouldn't be able to get a Rizzler between them, as one of my friends used to say. And they are, frankly, birds of a feather. Simon Cowell, who broke into the big time after being guided by sexual predator Max Clifford. And in fact, the first meeting between Simon Cowell and David Walliams was not very successful. And that was when Cowell was doing the X Factor. And he was on ITV's Lorraine for a chat. Again, part of that kind of very much LGBTQ media mafia. And Lorraine is very much part of it as well, her being an ally. And Cowell recalled him coming into the dressing room while I was doing X Factor and I pitched him the show. We had one of the worst meetings that I've ever had. However, a year later, Walliams changed his mind. And they began working together in 2012. Walliams joined the judging panel of Britain's Got Talent. Their professional relationship developed immediately, characterized by what was described as a well-known bromance. And they had this kind of constantly flirtatious, teasing banter that went on for 10 years. I have no idea how anybody watched those two. Make me sick. And one of the things that he did a lot on Britain's Got Talent was take off his trousers a lot. Here he is in front of Simon Cowell, and what he has is you can see these pictures online. He has kind of like duck mouth imagery, and again, it is about debasing women. I don't believe that these men like women. I don't believe that at all. I think that they are kind of beyond misogynists. And again, you know, this is Britain's Got Talent was a family show, is a family show. That's the whole point about the franchise. And yet they allowed him to get on with all of this kind of behavior where he was regularly dropping his trousers, being very, very flirtatious with Simon Cowell, very, very camp indeed. They did different things. They did comedy skits about their kind of friendship, their relationship. There was one, I think, for charity where Simon Cowell was getting married and David Walliams arrived in the church dressed as the bride saying, "No, Simon, it should be me," and all that kind of stuff. But there was a lot of lewd, suggestive stuff that took place on Britain's Got Talent. As I said, it's been there all the time. And Britain's Got Talent came a fair way after Little Britain, but they allowed him to get away with it because he was still bringing in the money and the crowds. Let me have a glug of this. Excuse me. Thank you very much. Yeah, so they allowed him to get away with all of this stuff, which I think is honestly truly atrocious in the public domain and in the public sphere. It's all part of the club, Christine, in our faces. Yes, it is. ALK. Is that ALK? So yeah, horrible stuff, frankly. And their co-hosts, Amanda Holden, very, very supportive again. I mean, they're all in it together. Alicia Dixon, they're all in it together. You don't get to stay on the judging panel of Britain's Got Talent at that time without being supportive of what was taking place. Yes, Woodman, pansexual is a problematic expression because how far does it extend? Indeed. So what happened with Britain's Got Talent and what eventually evolved into him having to leave? So he's on there for a decade, right? Carrying out all this kind of ritualistic humiliation, very highly sexualized stuff for a family audience. So again, shaping society, normalizing for children to see grown men dropping their trousers, right? And don't forget, this David Walliams has played a paedophilic character, of which I will talk about shortly. So a very problematic character indeed. And what happened was, for some reason, just 3 of the Britain's Got Talent shows were checked, and one revealed David Walliams in his full grotesque glory, but only 3. So out of just checking 3 of these Britain's Got Talent, they discovered at least one was full of David Walliams saying the following. He was recorded. So what happened was a mic picked up him having a kind of panel discussion with his panel, you know, not that it wasn't intended for the public. It was intended as a private conversation, but nonetheless, it's highly insightful about what they thought. So he was recorded saying of one of the contestants, she thinks you want to F her, but you don't. I know, she's just like, oh, F off. I was saying she thinks you want to F her, but you don't. It's the last thing on your mind. But she's like, yep, I bet you do. No, I don't. I had a bit of a boner, but now it's going. It's now shriveled up inside my body. That was what he was saying about one female contestant. It's so deplorable. It shows such a clear hatred of women, not just that woman, of women. And in a statement, he later said, "I would like to apologize to the people I made disrespectful comments about during breaks in filming for Britain's Got Talent. They were private conversations." And he was caught out also making, I think, jokes about somebody's age as well, if I remember correctly. Don't quote me on that. But there was another comment that he was caught out on. Anyway, what ended up happening was that they got rid of him. They couldn't keep him because they knew he was a liability. They were probably thankful that that was the worst that got leaked out. And bear in mind, that was only 1 out of 3 shows. What the hell was that man saying over 10 years that was backed up by Alicia Dixon, by Simon Cowell, and by Amanda Holden, his co-host on Britain's Got Talent? Really disgusting stuff. That conversation shows who he is. It absolutely does. Anyway, what happened was in 2023, Walliams reached a settlement with the production company Fremantle. He filed a lawsuit alleging that the release of the recording breached data protection regulations. And Britain's Got Talent producer at Fremantle, they apologized and they reached an amicable resolution after those remarks were leaked. Now, if you sue for data breach, it's the last resort because you can't sue for defamation. And he knew he couldn't sue for defamation because they had him banged to rights. This is who you are. And so he went for the, oh no, they leaked my data. That's my data. That's my personal data. So pretty reprehensible stuff, and pretty reprehensible stuff that the production company were forced to apologize to him as well after it leaked out and showed how disgusting and repugnant he is. Repugnant. No, Gina, creeps don't like getting exposed, and they're only sorry that they got caught and exposed. And that, I would say, absolutely covers both of them throughout. I don't necessarily believe that they've had a change of heart. Absolutely not. I think that it's because the backlash has been so severe and people now realize that we are dealing with two degenerates. So I think the thing that probably upsets me the most, though, in many respects, is the influence that David Walliams has had on children. That really, really concerns me. This is where his money has hugely come from. So in early 2008, he signed a contract with HarperCollins to publish 2 children's books. The debut novel was The Boy in the Dress. The Boy in the Dress. And it explores several of the themes from Little Britain. And it shows kind of like his camp humor of cross-dressing and, you know, being very effeminate. And the story recounts a neglected 12-year-old boy called Dennis, and Dennis is searching for a female role model, and he has a friendship with the popular girl in school. And, you know, again, when it first came out, I was like, why? Listen, I don't have a problem at all. Honestly, I really don't. Let anybody wear exactly what they want. But it was so clearly an agenda that your first debut novel for children is called The Boy in the Dress. Children are buying these, Ella. And yeah, disgusting stuff. Rat Burger was good, says Simon. Got you. Rat Burger was, I think, his 3rd one. Was it? Or maybe his 4th. Anyway, he had others, obviously. Mr. Stink. Mr. Stink was about a 12-year-old girl who meets a tramp and helps look after him, but she keeps him hidden from the family. And again, for me, a very problematic theme, because what you have is David Walliams writing about a young girl having a secret relationship with a grown man that her family don't know about. So I always look at what is written, you know, between the lines, what is unsaid, what is the subtext of this, what is the overall view that I get from this. And I had a lot of problems with that, a lot of problems with it. And his books largely aimed at children, yeah, and but he also some of his books were aimed at teenagers and children over 9, we were told. And he released others, Gangster Granny and Rat Burger. That Rat Burger was his 5th book, Simon likes. Tells the story of a young girl named Zoe whose life is a misery as she has an evil stepmother. And again, trading on these hackneyed old stereotypes, wicked stepmother. I mean, this is so old-fashioned. It really is. And awful auntie. And again, what he showed a lot of the time in his books was an absolute loathing of women, an absolute loathing. And so, yeah, but he released a ton of books, made a ton of money, very concerning themes indeed. And like his Little Britain characters, they are full of harmful and horrible stereotypes. And, you know, he brought HarperCollins 100 million in sales via dozens of books. I mean, just a huge amount of money, huge amount of money. And I don't even think that's not the sum total. These are totals that they've given out as the times have gone on. And but his books, as I say, frequently display an absolute dislike of women. He frequently writes about female characters without clothes on in children's books who find themselves in horrible, debased, humiliating circumstances. For example, in his 2013 book, Demon Dentist, there is Winnie, a social worker who he described as having an abundant bum, gets trapped in a wire fence. She's pushed through it. So very kind of humiliating stuff. And he also talked about how Winnie peered at a boy, she slid along the sofa and her big fat face came close to his. And just again, really horrible stereotypes. Female characters in Walliams' books are largely depicted as useless or absent or just hopeless or having affairs or abandoning their children. Definitely, this is a man with some problems. And in 2010, he wrote Billionaire Boy, and there was a character called Sapphire Stone, who was a page 3 girl depicted as a gold digger. And he has repeat references to overweight women, clearly loathes and hates any woman who isn't stick thin, although I would argue he doesn't like women full stop. And again, really harmful racial stereotypes, similar to what he'd been allowed to get away with in Little Britain. He had a Chinese character in one of his books, Brian Wong, who was never ever wrong, for God's sake. And they eventually took it out. And just awful. What he did was he normalized jokes on minorities for children from a very young age. That's what he did. He kind of validated the idea that we can laugh at people just because they're different. And they were always based on very negative stereotypes. And just kind of so cliche. He'd have things like, like Brian Wong as one example, who was supposed to be quite nerdy, and he wore glasses and he had small beady eyes. This is so old fashioned. This goes back to like the 60s and 70s, and nothing had changed. But HarperCollins knew they had a problem, but they didn't care because he was still raking in money. These people have no care and concern until it starts to affect the bottom line. So at the time, when there was a lot of criticism being said about his books, HarperCollins said, in consultation with our author and illustrator, we can confirm that a new story will be written to replace Brian Wong in a future edition of The World's Worst Children. Then he had like Raj, the shopkeeper, a very lazy stereotype of an Asian man. The whole idea was there was this South Asian newsagent who speaks in non-standard English, famous for being a cheapskate who sells his customers food that is out of date. A lot of stereotypes, a lot of really divisive shite that he was been pumping out. And it makes me sick because both of these are upper middle class white men who are just constantly just punching down on people constantly, and they made a mint from it, and they've been rewarded by the media establishment for creating these stereotypical, distasteful characters. Really, I think, repugnant stuff. And don't even get me started about how both of them, particularly Walliams, loves to sneer at working class. Well, both of them do, actually. But in his book, Walliams sneered a lot at the working class, especially the world's worst parents. He targeted essentially the working class. And much of the material, frankly, was recycled from Little Britain. I don't understand how a book publisher can look at David Walliams, look at his output from Little Britain and say, oh, that's the kind of thing we want to put in children's books, unless there is an agenda. It's the worst kind of humor. The worst. Simon says it's the Freemasonic agenda. And then there was the single mother stereotypes, which I also absolutely abhorred. I thought it was absolutely disgusting. In his books, he depicted a single mother of 2 living in a tower block as one of the world's worst parents, when all she does actually in the book is really love her children, but he loathed her. And honestly, as a single mother who worked every hour that God would send me, I'm so over the attacking of single mothers as feckless and hopeless and a drain on society. And I'm so over white wealthy men using working class women as the butt of their jokes and then feeding this crap to children. And his work was not of great literary quality. A lot of his work is made up of lists in his books, but it was very much part of the celebs can do anything that they want to and get away with it because they are celebrities. And that is a trend that is actually now leaving us finally, but it's taken about 30 years. And again, HarperCollins, they kept defending him. They were like, David Walliams' books have a diverse readership, which is reflected in their content. He writes about the real worlds of children using comedy as a way of confronting many difficult topics, from the groundbreaking The Boy in the Dress to Gangster Granny, and which should be considered in the wider context of the overall stories. Well, I've done that. I've considered that. And I will say that HarperCollins allowed this man to debase our children for a very long period of time, and purely because he made millions for them. So why suddenly in December 2025 did HarperCollins let go of their cash cow? Why did they? So HarperCollins terminated their contract with David Walliams following a year-long investigation into alleged inappropriate behavior and harassment towards young women at the company, during which one employee was given a 5-figure payoff. Female staff at HarperCollins were told that if they had to visit him at home or anywhere, they had to travel in pairs. You think you might have a problem if female staff are being told they have to travel in pairs. That should have been the point that HarperCollins got rid of him, but it wasn't. It wasn't. So he went from hero to zero because they could finally afford to let him go, because in 2018, Walliams' books constituted 44% of all sales of HarperCollins children's titles and generated hundreds of millions by 2019. Okay, as I say, huge amount of money for them. But in the summer of 2025, sales of his book fell by 60%. It's not a coincidence that they let him go Christmas 2025. Okay, and it's also not a coincidence that what happened was that HarperCollins CEO Charlie Redmayne, he departed the company in October, and in came a woman, Kate Elton, who succeeded him. And it was Kate Elton who got rid of Walliams. But it was, the bottom line was money. It's nothing to do with a woman caring more than a male CEO. I don't believe that for a second. But the idea that these young females were told, if you have to go and visit him, you have to go in twos, tells us pretty much everything we need to know. Everything we need to know. Thank you, Sugar. I appreciate that. And Tom said it is a comedy show. Do not watch it if you object. Tom, I think we've just found a perv in our comments, people. You defend it all you like, Tom. And you've shown up in the comments, and I'm here to tell you that the kind of people who find their humor funny is also problematic. So that's probably you, Tom. So anyway, Walliams went from hero to zero. And as I say, they could finally afford to let him go. Old boss out, new boss in, clean slate, all of that. A spokesperson for Walliams said David has never been informed of any allegations raised against him by HarperCollins. He was not party to any investigation or given any opportunity to answer questions. He strongly denies that he has behaved inappropriately and is taking legal advice. Of course, he's taking legal advice. And so that was it. That was it. His relationship with HarperCollins was over. And I would suggest that that is the area in part that we don't know the half of. And HarperCollins have let down their staff, certainly let down their junior female members of staff. So, you know, I think that's really problematic. And that this was allowed to happen, I think it really was very problematic. And one or two people in the comments saying, I really enjoyed Little Britain. Yeah, well, fine. You do you, boo. And but I saw it for what it was. Maybe your sense of humor is different to mine. But for exactly the reasons I've outlined and the characters that I've outlined, and I thought it was debased and perverse and shaping society in a way that was normalizing really egregious behavior. But you enjoy it. As I say, you do you, boo. And we are who we are. And we enjoy what we like for particular reasons. Anyway, so a spokesperson for Walliams has not been able to kind of further on that about him taking legal action or what is happening or moving it forward or any of that. but he's obviously pulled back from public life. The BBC pulled the plug on a Christmas special that was involving him. Would I lie to you? And apparently what he'd done was Nazi salutes during the recording, and the BBC then decided to pull it because it drew criticism internally. The BBC said the footage would not be broadcast. But, and this is where I say, I'm really, really concerned that this man has been able to get away with very serious and significant sexual aggression in plain sight. David Walliams has long revealed himself to be extremely sexually aggressive, and he hasn't hidden it. It was no surprise to many that his book publishers finally got rid of him, because the accusations about him and women who worked there became too much. And also because he was just not making money for them anymore. And he has absolutely revealed himself to be a predatory performer. And there was some footage that emerged from a BBC documentary featuring Little Britain on tour in Australia 13 years ago. And it's no longer available on BBC iPlayer. And they had this thing called Hide the Sausage. And the clip can still be seen on YouTube, and it shows Walliams as a predatory gay former children's entertainer called Des K. And he gropes 3 males said to be aged 16 to 18 on stage in this game called Hide the Sausage. And the video is horrible, very cringeworthy. I'm not even sure why it's still available, but it is. And what happens is that he invites the audience members on stage, where he simulates buggery and appears to kiss their bare buttocks. And so that was something of an insight. And Des K is a pedophile character. Now, maybe people in my comments enjoy that sort of humor. I don't. I have a problem with that. But, you know, different strokes for different folks. And the Hide the Sausage routine was really, really problematic. Let me show you an image here. This is during a comic relief special. David Walliams is in the blue, and he is pulling trousers down from Jeremy Edwards. Jeremy Edwards was a soap actor, probably still is, for Hollyoaks. And the idea was that they were raising money for comic relief, and they came on and did the Hide the Sausage routine, and then essentially exposed Jeremy Edwards to the live audience. So that in itself, I think, is very problematic. I mean, honestly, if you get to the stage where Peter Tatchell is criticizing you, then how far have you gone? Right. So Peter Tatchell, known as a human rights campaigner, but has very different ideas about LGBTQ, about the age of consent and all those things than I do. But he has even criticized David Walliams and says that Walliams' portrayal of a predatory pedophile is not funny. It's sickening and unacceptable. That sketch should not be repeated anywhere. It should be withdrawn from public viewing and filed in a film archive so that future historians have evidence of what passed for comedy. But I don't think that's the worst one. I think the worst one. So you do find that sickening, vendetta. So I think, though, the worst one is this video I'm going to show you, because I do have a problem with this. This is again, a charity special, for goodness sake, and it features Mark Ronson. Don't know if you know who Mark Ronson is. Mark Ronson is very famous music producer, and he famously did Amy Winehouse's Back to Black album. Brilliant stuff. And here they are together. And Mark Ronson was at a charity event in Brixton. And it was to obviously raising money, and Walliams was doing his routine, his shtick, and he invited Mark Ronson up onto the stage. And I think this is at the O2 Academy in Brixton. And I think what happened is absolute common assault. At least, certainly sexual assault. I'm going to play you the video if you haven't already seen it. I think I haven't got the audio. The audio was I thought that might create a problem on YouTube, and not least because what you've got is like lots of loud screaming and cackling and encouragement and all kind of like that. But the visual is enough. The visual is enough. This is what David Walliams did to Mark Ronson. Very aggressive. As you can see, he's on top of Mark Ronson. Mark Ronson's trying to get up. Walliams doing everything he can to take down his trousers. Look how extreme he is. Does everything he can, rips them down. Mark Ronson is looking extremely distressed. Cosmic, that is assault, and it's never, ever been seen as assault. Look at it. Absolutely, outrageously disgusting and abhorrent, and he was allowed to get away with that. And not only he should be in prison, Marco. Yes, absolutely. And what is he doing at this moment in time with Mark Ronson's bits? So Mark Ronson was, frankly, naturally very distressed after dealing with that. Imagine. And there he is. He's like, what the hell just happened to me? And David Walliams, the day after, he was asked about it. And you know what he said? It really disturbed me a lot. Actually, it's the language of a rapist, frankly. What he actually said is, when I put my mind to it, I have the strength of 10 men, so there's no stopping me. Mark is a cool, calm character. To put him in that position was out of his comfort zone. I offered to buy him a new suit. He said it wasn't necessary because he gets them free from Gucci. That, to me, was a clear sexual assault. Absolutely disgusting. And yes, Vendetta, you'd only do that if you're a predator. And that's why I call him a predator. I think it's absolutely disgusting, absolutely abhorrent. And, he's a big guy, right? He's a big guy. I, for one, would not want to be on the receiving end of David Walliams when he decided to rip clothes off of a person. He's clearly strong. He's said to be 6'3". He's a bully. He's a narcissist. He's a predator. And the idea that he has the strength of 10 men when he wants what he wants really tells us everything that we need to know. And I'm shocked that Mark Ronson has never done more about that. I'm shocked. Marco is genuinely shocked. He's evil and sick and needs to be prosecuted. He's pure scum. Yes, Mels, it does feel like a humiliation ritual, doesn't it? Ella said Ronson himself is 6 foot. He just took advantage because they were on stage, hiding in plain sight. Scumbag. And it is scumbag. I hadn't seen that before. I wasn't aware of the hide the sausage routine, and I was really quite disgusted about it. And Simon said he's a national treasure. Yes, indeed he is. Indeed he is. So, yeah, he's absolutely, in my mind, according to my own opinion, and we are allowed to have that, I am of the belief that David Walliams is absolutely a predator, and that there is a great deal more to come out about him, because if you can do that in plain sight, what the hell are you doing behind the scenes? That HarperCollins has to send at least 2 females together because one is not safe on her own. Problematic, allegedly. And they're also, yes, Jilly, exactly. It's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. I wanted to share that. I thought that was important. I really did. And honestly, I don't want to put shade on any of my viewers who did enjoy some of Little Britain. I just found some of the characters really just horrible and repugnant and very debased and everything. And just kind of looking back on them, and also coming from a working class background, the whole Vicky Pollard thing, I really hated that, because again, very upper middle class men who are just punching down. So that was always my kind of take on it. But I'm in no doubt whatsoever that this man is a predator. No doubt whatsoever. And I think he showed that with Mark Ronson, and he showed it with 16-year-olds on the stage, and this whole game of hide the sausage. There's loads of stuff online where he's on stage with 16-year-olds, with a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, 18-year-old. They said between 16 and 18, playing this weird, freaky game. Really weird. And, where would any of my dark side people be without their wholesome, fulsome support of the COVID narrative? Where would they be? Where would they be? Walliams himself appeared in a video campaign, which was designed to encourage the public to have the C19 jab. That was the same video, by the way, that Elton John and Liz Hurley were in. Two people who have made their way onto the dark side. Here is David Walliams encouraging people.
Vaccinated, the more chance there is of eradicating the national COVID pandemic.
Very nice, cut there. Can we make it more David Walliams, please?
It's really important that people of all ages get the jab.
It's a no from me, I'm afraid, David.
And no, actually, David, and are you going to be involved in compensating some of those people, some of those many hundreds of thousands of people who are encouraged to do that, following you, Elton and Liz Hurley and your ilk, encouraging them to take that? And David Walliams actually said that he wanted the UK to get back to the all singing, all dancing rhythm of life that we love. And really problematic. And at the point that they were doing that, we were told that 45 million people, 85.5% of the UK adult population had had a first dose of a COVID vaccine. Liars, you lied. It wasn't that high. And we know it wasn't. You were telling us that because you wanted to create this whole idea of herd immunity and more. They lied to us. I doubt he did, Essa. Fun times. I doubt he did. Okay. And Matt Lucas, he did a reworked version of his Baked Potato song from Shooting Stars titled Thank You, Baked Potato. All proceeds from the track went towards the Feed NHS campaign, which was aiming to provide meals for NHS workers in the midst of C19. And so they both did their part for C19. Of course, they did. They're paid shills, DJ Markson. Anybody who pushed that were shills. Whether they were paid or not, one way or another, they benefited. And in terms of money, let's talk money. So they have generated tens of millions of pounds throughout their careers, with Walliams alone, as I say, having generated over 100 million in book sales for HarperCollins. But a breakdown of the money. So in 2017 alone, Walliams sold 16.57 million worth of books, and he made a ton of money on Britain's Got Talent. They're both multi-millionaires, right? They've made a lot of money out of their debasing of the nation, and not even the nation, because they went to America and they transported their loathing of working class Brits to an American audience. And we were told that they were offered 3 million by Netflix for a Little Britain reboot. That hasn't happened. And they were said to have made at least 1 million each from their live tours. They made a fortune. They've made a lot of money, but David Walliams' money has primarily come from children's book sales, which of course makes me sick to the core. And they have been media darlings for a very, very long time. They have been protected by the media because they have their own secrets to hide. And as I say, they are very much part of the LGBTQ media bunch, including Lorraine and Graham Norton. And does anybody remember a very peculiar interview that took place with Liam Payne? Liam Payne, former member of One Direction, we were told died falling from his hotel balcony a couple of years ago. And Liam Payne was on the Graham Norton show in 2017. Yes, it was. And it was with David Walliams. And have a listen to this. Liam Payne starts to tell a story involving Diddy and involving Jay-Z. And David Walliams is deeply concerned and tries to shut him down. But he does it as a joke. Just have a listen. See what you make of it.
Hello to P. Diddy, and Jay-Z was there, and Leonardo DiCaprio was sat at the
All right,
side.
I think you've dropped enough names. Okay, I think people thought Prince and Brian Ferry was good. We don't need to hear about other people who are in the room. Just stick on the people the story's about.
So I went over and I was trying to think who's the easy target in this scenario, who's the one that you go to say the hello, and I'm thinking, I saw him get him to the Greek. I'm going to go over there and say hello to him. So I thought, P. Diddy. So I went out to shake his hand. And I shook his hand and I was, oh, nice to meet you. And he's just going, with the longest handshake ever. And I'm like sat there just looking in P. Diddy's eyes like, when is this going to end? And then the worst of it happened. There was a whole thing with Jay-Z and I went to lean in to speak to him. But you can't lean in to speak to Jay-Z. You're not allowed to lean in. And his bodyguard just like shoved me like this and I went flying across the room. And I was like, right, I'm just going to go and sit over here with Eddie Golden. Thank you, that's enough.
So just to be clear, first of all, obviously, rest in peace, Liam Payne, very young to have died in such awful circumstances. Walliams does look concerned. I thought so too. And he's like, oh, your name's dropping, that kind of vibe, right? Essentially I think to shut him down from naming any names. I'm not making any allegations regarding David Walliams and Liam Payne's death. I'm not saying that. But oftentimes when you have these situations, so they were on the Graham Norton show doing that with Salma Hayek, well-known Zionist. So what a combination of awful people other than poor Liam. He was like, Liam was in the lion's nest, frankly. And I think often, so what happens is that they are all in on the joke. That's the thing. They're all in on the joke. They know really what they're all kind of laughing about and how far they're prepared to go and everything. And I got the impression, Vendetta, I got the impression that he was trying to shut him down. I absolutely did get that impression. And he said, okay, that's it. You've named enough names now. Exactly. So managed out. I agree. So I think that's a clip that is problematic in many respects. And so what do I really want to say? Well, I think that these are people who have made a great deal of money by dubious means. I have no respect for either of these characters, absolutely not. And as I say, I do believe that David Walliams has carried out assault in plain sight, and I don't understand how he was allowed to get away with it. Absolutely outrageous. And these are people who've made a great deal of money out of stereotypes, whether that is working class, whether it's disabled, whether it's gay, women, children, black or Asian people. But times we are told have moved on. The problem with Walliams is that he's a problem. He is a problem that has been enabled for so long. Britain's Got Talent, sexist remarks leaked. The problems with HarperCollins, but this is scratching the surface. We know it is. His behaviour has gone beyond inappropriate behaviour to actual assault in public. Heck knows, as I say, what he's doing behind the scenes. Lucas, it would appear, is less of a problem because he tends to keep himself in the background more, but I'm in no doubt that he's a character that we could frankly do with seeing much less anyway. Lucas and Walliams are disgusting. They are repugnant. They are perverse people, separately and together. And it's doubled the toxicity when they came together, and they've been allowed to breathe into the public domain that toxicity funded by the very toxic, the very perverse BBC. Grotesque, classic, classist stuff, racist, sexist, all the stuff that I've said before. Everything wrong with society, they have cashed in on. The BBC made them famous, cashed in on that success, and moved away swiftly when it was evident that the liability that is David Walliams in particular could no longer be contained. There will be more and worse allegations. Of that, I can guarantee you. And we are all sick of this old boys network in British media. It's time to end it, frankly. And, but, you know, their money, their fame has enabled them to be protected. But as we have seen with other problematic TV people, once they lose their use, they are out and they are exposed. And for me, frankly, it can't come a moment too soon. And so that's what I wanted to say. They are all the court jesters of the British Crown, says TTC. Not only allowing, but endorsing BBC is satanic, says Nikki. So thank you for being here. And clearly I'm not a fan, and that's the way it goes, yo. And just don't understand why we've promoted just awful people like this for such a long period of time, other than the kind of, you know, funky handshake club that goes on in the background, the old boys network. And, you know, they would never have been given that prominence if people behind the scenes, and I think it was Lorraine Hegarty who was the controller at the time, if people behind the scenes didn't approve of what they were doing. That's how it works. There's absolutely no way on earth that they would have been given such prominence unless there weren't people behind the scenes who were very supportive of what they were saying and what they were doing. Simple stuff. You're very welcome. You're very welcome, people. Just two of many in the TV Media Club. Indeed. So as ever, thank you to my wonderful patrons, to the people who support me here. And thank you again, Jacqueline. Thank you. Very much appreciate your super chat this morning. And thank you all for being here. And, you know, again, go back to what I always say, right? And that is you don't have to agree with me. You don't. But I think that some things that I said today are kind of beyond agreement. Like we've all just seen what he did to Mark Ronson. I mean, I would be highly surprised if there was anybody in my comments thought that was acceptable. Whereas you may find some of his characters, their characters funny. I can't believe that anybody would find those sort of assaults funny. And especially because it's based on a paedophile. The whole point about the character in the Hide the Sausage is supposed to be a paedophile. Disgusting stuff. Thank you, Reba. Right, I'm off, lovely people. Oh, Cosmic is traumatized. I didn't mean to. So there you go. Thank you all, you wonderful people. And love being here with you this morning as ever. It was a sexual assault, full stop, Philo. It was. It is good to get different perspectives and insights. It's the whole can you separate the artist from the art thing? And that's a good question, Vendetta. Can you? Because I can't with these two. I can't. Anyway, I'm going, and I will see you Monday. We've got a brilliant show lined up on Monday, of course. Why would we ever not? I'm going to be joined by Des Henderson, the director and writer of The Lost Boys, about the missing boys to do with Belfast paedophile ring and the British government and secret services. And no, Simon, we're going to give the war talk a little bit of a miss for a while. And that's no shade at all on Warren. It's just that my viewers get really depleted and exhausted, and their war talk they can get from Good Morning Britain, right? So, yeah, I want to give that a swerve because I think a lot of that is also problematic and a distraction. But you're very welcome. And I will see you Monday, you lovely people. Take good care of yourself. See you Monday.